right, you are live. All right. Good evening, everyone. I'm Paul Kagebein, the Adult Event Coordinator here at the Garland County Library, and I'm here tonight with Sonny Kay, who, in a nutshell, is a prominent figure here in Hot Springs and in the art and music scene. So, good evening, Sonny.
Good evening. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. If you guys are watching and have any questions for Sonny Kay, please leave them in the comments section of this Facebook live stream, and I'll ask them here if I get a chance. So Sonny became the executive director of the local nonprofit Lowkey Arts after moving to Hot Springs in 2017. Lowkey Arts, of course, hosts all kinds of events, including the famous annual Valley of the Vapors Indie Music Festival. I wore my shirt here from a VOV a few years back just for this occasion. I don't remember which year this is. Do you?
Can you raise it up and see the bottom? Oh, that was before my time, so I would say probably 2016 or maybe.
That sounds about right.
Yeah.
So Sonny, other than that, Sonny has a history as a graphic designer, a musician, the founder of a cult record label, and he's created over 100 album covers for musicians such as the band, the Mars Volta. So that's a pretty big resume. So we'll get to the present day state of Lowkey and what 2021 has in store for it eventually, but let's go to the beginning of the story. Let's start with your origins in the industry. You founded your record label, Gold Standard Labs, in 1993.
That's right.
How and why did this come about?
That came about as a direct result of my involvement in the local music scene in Boulder, where I was living at the time and eventually going to school. I moved to Colorado in high school from California, and got into the local music scene there, and kind of jumped into the world of punk and hardcore punk rock with both feet at the time. And I graduated high school in 1989 and was not at all eager to go to college right away, and wound up moving down into Boulder and meeting other like-minded people who eventually, we hatched the idea of forming a band, which was pretty ill-conceived at first. We were not very good. I definitely had no experience or any kind of training in that regard at all, but my colleagues thankfully did, and we cobbled this thing together, and the band existed for 6 or 8 months, and in that time we managed to play with a few of our absolute hero groups from the East and West Coasts who were touring through Colorado, and became apparent that if you put your mind to something and you and your friends are unified in a goal, you can achieve it. And so we were really that put the wind in our sails, and things kind of snowballed from there. I was in a couple of local bands there in Boulder, and within almost immediately I started putting on shows for touring bands who were coming through town from other parts of the country or the world, and realized that the do-it-yourself movement, if you want to call it that, the punk underground at the time, was a really a fertile place. There was so much going on. There was this vast network of stuff all over the country and the world, and tapping into that and being able to contribute your energy to it was very easy and very accessible and really addictive. And once I kind of got into that, I never really left. And the record label grew out of that, actually, from just being involved in local music and having a few bands myself, and eventually having the luxury of record labels approaching us about releasing our music. It dawned on me what a shame it was that there were so many other things going unnoticed locally, bands that would come and go without ever being documented or remembered. And for me personally, there was a couple of those that were hugely influential and meant so much to me. It broke my heart to think of them fading into obscurity, even though ultimately that is probably what happened. But I managed to go into a little bit of debt committing them to a record in the process. So that was a very exciting thing to be able to do, to be part of it.
I'd say probably the most famous band on your label was the prog rock band, the Mars Volta, and they're one of the most acclaimed bands of the genre. So how did you come to work with them specifically?
Um, it was a slow but organic process. I met them long before that group, when they were much younger. As I'm sure you know, they were in the group at the drive-in before that, and had the strange luck to meet them early in their career and become friendly with them and remain friendly with them. And our paths crossed here and there through the second half of the 90s. I was touring a lot myself in different groups, and eventually GSL was as you mentioned, the label started in 1993. By 2000, 2001, it had become fairly established, and we had put out 40 or so, 45 or so records by that point. And the guys in that group, the Mars Volta, immediately prior to the Mars Volta, when At the Drive-In disbanded, they switched gears. They were living in Long Beach, and I was living in San Diego at the time. And they started for about a year or so, for 6 months or a year. They put a lot of their focus into a dub reggae group that they had, like an instrumental kind of for fun type thing. I mean, they put out records and stuff, but it never had the kind of ambition attached to it that their more kind of rock groups did. But I loved that group, which was called De Facto. And we all realized we have a mutual love of dub reggae, which enthusiasts of that always feel strong kinship with one another, I guess. And so I offered to put out a record for that group, De Facto, which we did. And in the process of doing that album, which was called Megaton Shot Blast, we all, Omar Rodriguez and myself, became much closer than we had been already. And we all realized how much fun we were having doing these projects together. And so at that point, he and I kind of partnered in the record label. And along with that partnership came the presence of De Facto, and very soon after that, the Mars Volta, who formed kind of right around the same time. And we put out their first EP, which was called Tremulant. That came out in early 2002, and was far and away the biggest selling record that we ever put out on the label. And it was a foregone conclusion that the band were going to sign to a much bigger record label. That's just the way these things work. Sure. And there was never any illusion about us being their only label. That we were much too small to be able to handle that. But we did certainly kind of reap a lot of benefits from their various associations as they accelerated and kind of skyrocketed. And so we kind of, we as a label, GSL, were sort of along for the ride with that in a lot of ways, and got to do the vinyl issues of all their records and that kind of thing. So it was a really exciting thing to be a part of, for sure.
You get that kind of cliche brag. I knew them first.
Yes. I mean, I think a lot of people could lay claim to that, and they certainly. I mean, those guys are some of the most ambitious and prolific musicians I've ever known. I mean, they were putting out record after record after record when they were 18, 19 years old. So I just happened to be there at an advantageous time, and we all needed one another. So it was great.
What other notable artists did you work with during those early years?
I suppose the other really notable one would be a group from San Diego called the Locust, who still exist, although they're not a fully functioning full-time band or anything. They are usually kind of described as quote unquote sci-fi grindcore. They're very, very extreme music, very abrasive and very technical, and certainly an acquired taste for a lot of people. But they also are incredibly popular within a whole realm of music, and are to call them proficient is a serious understatement. I mean, they are some of the most gifted musicians I've ever known, and the fact that they choose to play this extreme music is quite amazing, actually. And so they have been around in one form or another for closing in on 25 years now, which is quite remarkable now that I think about it that way. But they were actually probably they more than any other band before the Mars Volta were responsible for the label having momentum and growing and becoming a thing with a certain generation of kids into post-punk music, I guess you could say.
So what was the transition like from starting a record label basically in a bedroom up to releasing music by someone who goes on to be a Grammy-winning artist?
Well, it was very slow and organic. I mean, there's certainly no other way around that. I mean, a lot of people figured out in that era, in the mid to late 90s, there was a lot of controversy in the underground world about people sidestepping some of the measures required to kind of come up the ranks, and there was a lot of people accused of selling out in one way or another. A lot of those arguments seem, frankly, kind of meaningless now. But I'm happy. I'm very proud of the fact that we did everything ourselves and from the ground up, and never. Certainly, we had partners along the way who helped us achieve our goals in business, which sounds so much more strategic than it ever really was. But we grew slowly. The first 4 or 5 records I put out, I couldn't get distribution for, mainly because the bands were completely unknown and had no following, and the label was unknown. So from the vantage point of a record shop or a record distributor, of course, it didn't make much sense. But I wasn't taking no for an answer at that point, and basically began by trading the records away, and managed to do that successfully with 4 or 5 different releases, and traded off to every corner of the world, and of course got back this huge mountain of records by these foreign bands that again most people had never heard of. But I took all of that stock, all of that product, if you want to call it that, and with a friend launched a distribution company in the San Francisco Bay Area called Bottleneck, which existed for 3 or 4 years, and that more than any other mechanism is what grew the record label. That we were able to distribute all kinds of other music in addition to just GSL stuff, and GSL was able to grow exponentially because of that. And so I was also in a really by that point living in the Bay Area, in just an incredibly fertile music scene. So there was bands left and right to put out records by, and who would go on tour and sell the records and spread the news of the label far and wide, so to speak. So it all kind of, there was a lot of momentum and a lot happening at that time in that area, in this whole world of what at that point was still underground music. This was still 3, 4, 5 years before the Mars Volta.
Sure. So eventually you go on and you throw the towel on the label and turn to making art full time. What's the story behind that?
Well, doing the record label was a labor of love, first of all, and something that I always approached more from the angle as being an artist, a visual artist myself, as well as a musician. And I suppose something of a conceptual artist too, in a sense, because I always approached the label more as an artistic gesture rather than a business. And of course, business factored into it in big ways here and there, but we always managed to sort of have a unified goal in mind with doing the label, and more than anything, that was the joy in doing it, and the thrill of walking a group through the process of creating a finished product. And that was something that I embraced wholeheartedly and loved. It was probably the aspect I loved more than any other thing, except maybe the travel part. But the thrill of getting to help people realize their dreams of having a record or whatever was very fulfilling for me. But as things progressed and the advent of MP3 players and streaming and all that kind of stuff, like, things changed really, really drastically, really quickly. And a lot of our contemporary labels like adapted to that change, or those changes, and are still here putting out music. For better or for worse, we were having a difficult time adapting to those changes. And we were losing a lot of money on the last year's worth of releases that we did. We were having hard time breaking even on a lot of those things. And it was getting really, really competitive to put out the kind of music we were doing. And started to feel a little bit more like, at the time, and hindsight being 2020, I realized I probably wouldn't feel the same way about it now. But at the time, 13 years ago, it really felt like the business of being a record label was getting lost in the business of being a marketing company. And there's probably a lot of people who'd argue that there's probably not much of a difference between those two things. But for us at the time, we were facing adaptations to do with how we marketed the records and who we were marketing them to, and just the costs involved. And frankly, it was all just getting a little top heavy. And so the decision was made to stop doing it. And it was an abrupt decision, and it was not the most thoughtful decision, but we did it. And the fallout from doing it was kind of immediate, but so was the relief. And we kind of, everybody went to their corners, and I had already begun doing art in service of the label for advertising and that kind of thing, and just threw myself into it at that stage and started creating a lot of work that I wound up sharing with Omar and people who, by that point, of course, the Mars Volta was in full throttle, and I was fortunate enough to start having some of my work appear on solo records and that kind of thing, and other projects, what have you. And then before long, we found ourselves sort of back in the saddle again, and I was running the art half of a new record label for Omar through a bigger label in Los Angeles called Sargent House. And from that point on, I've just kind of been as far as record labels go, I've just been the art director rather than the guy holding the bag, so to speak. So yeah, that's the long answer to that question.
Well, so talk about your art for a second. I mean, what kind of artists are an inspiration on your work? And I mean, what kind of style would you say you have for anyone that is just tuning in, hasn't seen anything yet?
Well, I consider myself I consider myself a graphic designer first and foremost, and a fine artist, I suppose, somewhat second to that. I was trained. I went to college for fine arts, for painting and printmaking, and I've spent my life drawing and that kind of thing. So I have I suppose a hardwired feel for more traditional. What's the word I'm looking for? Art that's more, art you can touch.
Tactile, I don't know, physical.
Tactile, yeah. And however, in the early 2000s, during the time of many, many records coming out on the label and a lot of activity, and also just starting to have a sense of sort of artistic dissatisfaction in myself. I started to create art that was much more immediate, and I was using the tools that were at my disposal, which were frankly the internet and an iMac. And this was around 2005 or so, and I found myself, I would spend my days running a record label, sit in traffic for an hour to get home, and I'd spend my evenings creating this imagery that was just sort of meditative for me. There wasn't any real point to it. It was kind of to kind of take my mind off work and feel creative and have an outlet, and that was really it. And I found myself just sort of magnetized, drawn towards digital collage, and I was, it was something that was so in front of my face. It was just there, sort of presenting itself as an easy option. And in a sense, I kind of resisted it at first, because I thought, like, this is just something that probably millions of people are doing on their iMacs, and this is just a symptom of the Google age and that kind of thing. And it took me a while to really embrace it as a serious kind of form of expression. And once I got over that hurdle for myself, as something of a snob, I mean, I consider myself a bit of a I am a failed painter. I wanted to paint very badly, and I have returned to painting in my life a number of times. Most recently this year, actually, for Valley of the Vapors, I completed a painting, which is something I actually can't say I've ever done before. I've never really finished anything like that. I've always just sort of given up in frustration or disgust. So being able to accomplish that this year was a real hurdle for me. It was great. But anyway, that's beside the point. The ability to have my work see print quickly became very, as you can imagine, it's hugely satisfying and kind of addictive, right? So I think, I may be guilty of publishing some things that I now might consider premature, but that was simply because I had the luxury of these incredibly creative guys generating all of this music around me, and the ability to kind of sandwich those things together, which was a really just an incredible thing.
Right. Well, that kind of brings me to the next question I had. So as I said, when I introduced you, you have a pretty diverse resume, and I'm sure that made you a natural fit for your position of executive director. So it seems like you've kind of found this sweet spot where you combine three different passions of visual art and musical art and the business side of things, and turn that into a guiding philosophy for yourself. Would you say that's accurate?
Yeah, I would say that's accurate. Absolutely. The business part of it certainly doesn't come as naturally to me as the art part. And there are things that I just, even in my fifth decade of life, cannot bring myself to embrace doing. And I'm stubborn about certain things to do with that. And when it comes to math, I get tired, start shutting down. But I'm very restless by nature, and I don't. I've never. I suppose maybe to a fault, I've never enjoyed kind of lingering in any one area for too long. And it's not to say that I'm not, that I'm necessarily fickle. I just kind of approach things kind of like cyclically, if that's the right word, and kind of return to them. And I think a lot of at least with the visual work I do, some of the most satisfying things for me are things that take years to complete, things that maybe start out in one direction or one theme or one idea, and then with the benefit of years, sometimes of reflection or experience, I can come back to them and have a totally different understanding about something or meaning for it or concept for it, and it changes and it's better. And I'm grateful to myself for being patient or potentially lazy. But I do think that there's a lot to be said for, I love immediacy. I crave immediacy. That's why I threw myself into digital art. Absolutely. But there's a lot to be said for taking your time and really refining your message.
Just had a comment from Phil who says, "Don't be too restless. We need you here." Before we move away from art, we did have a question come in from Taylor. She asks, do you have any formal art training, or are you completely self-taught?
I'm completely self-taught digitally. I took art classes when I was a kid. I had the very remarkable experience of being taught painting when I was 13 and 14 by a nearly blind Russian man who had been a traveling artist with a circus in Russia for many years. And that had been many years prior to when he was teaching me. He was quite ancient, and it was not easier for him to do it. But that was a very definitive thing in my life. He really taught me how to see. He taught me how to look at something and see it, and interpret it as shapes in space, and translate them onto a two-dimensional surface. And that was something I feel incredibly lucky to have experienced. I mean, that was like no teacher I ever had in college or anywhere else, for that matter. I did go to the University of Colorado at Boulder. I did get a degree in what was called studio art. Most of my time there was spent doing printmaking, lithography and silk screening, that kind of thing. But I've always enjoyed live drawing from models and sketching and that kind of thing. And that's another thing I kind of return to periodically. But digitally speaking, I had the very good fortune of being able to sit in with my friend Chris Applegren, who ran Lookout Records, when I moved to California in the mid-90s, and was really attempting to take GSL up a notch, and also take control of what I was unable to do myself and what I had been kind of contracting out, which was the design part of it, the actual building of the record covers. Once we got into, really got into the digital age, and especially doing LPs and CDs, I mean, just doing something at Kinko's and gluing it together with Xerox art just doesn't cut it anymore. You have to do it digitally. And so I was trained, so to speak, informally and very quickly by Chris at Lookout, just by sitting in the office with him and doing a few layouts with him for GSL. So I have him to thank for that, and his leg up definitely gave me the courage to start attempting to do things in Photoshop, and at the time what was called Quark Express myself, which was a layout program that's since been replaced by InDesign. But that was my training.
Is there like a Oscars or Grammys equivalent for artists? Because you just gave a good thing.
That's my acceptance speech.
Yeah.
I'm sure Behance must give out awards of some kind. But yeah, Chris, I will eternally sing Chris's praises, because he put the genie back in the bottle, in a sense. Like, that was like magic to me. Photoshop was it was like smoke and mirrors. And then he, to actually begin to understand how it worked was incredibly, it was a game changer for me. Absolutely.
So what's the journey that ultimately led you to your position at Lowkey and here in Hot Springs? I mean, it's known as a city with a lot of culture, but for someone who's been around the world, why here?
Well, it's a great question. I passed through Hot Springs on tour as a performing musician in the mid 2000s, and that was largely the result of our book. The group I was in was our booking agent was contacted by someone here in Hot Springs, Bobby Missel, who's now my colleague at Lowkey Arts. Bobby was putting on shows at the Exchange here in downtown Hot Springs. And so we came and played there in 2006. I had never heard of Hot Springs, Arkansas before that, and had no concept of any of the history of this town or anything like that going on in this part of the country. Things to do with gambling and gangster culture and this whole kind of thing. It was a real eye opener for us. And fast forward a few years, and I was no longer living in Los Angeles, and had been living out in the desert outside Las Vegas for a few years, just kind of psychically regrouping. I think I was feeling really burnt out on Los Angeles, and had lived in my same wonderful but tiny apartment there for almost a decade, and was feeling a little bit landlocked and a little bit uninspired, and had a job doing art for a record label where I didn't even have to go to the office every day. So there was not really much reason to stay in LA. And I moved to Vegas sort of on a whim, had the opportunity to do that easily, and fell in love with living in the desert, and would certainly do that again in a heartbeat. I love the desert. Not a huge lover of Las Vegas, but that's neither here nor there. But during that time working out there, I was just freelancing most of the time, doing a lot of artwork. I intended to write. A big part of the story I told myself leaving Los Angeles was that I was going to move to the desert and write. And there were waves of that happened, and that continues to happen periodically, but it's not something that I have really devoted myself to in any serious way. But at some point during that whole process, I guess about 3 years ago now, a phone call came one day from Bobby here in Hot Springs, and Lowkey Arts, which I had known about sort of from afar, was in sort of transition and needing an executive director and somebody to come in and sort of guide it through the transition to its next phase, I guess you could say. And Bobby reached out to me and asked if I'd be interested. And my immediate reaction was probably, I don't think, my immediate thought was certainly probably not. This just doesn't, and then within 24 hours, it was kind of like, well, what's the issue with that? Like, I'm not doing anything here. Meaning Vegas. And this opportunity started to really seem like something that I could, not only utilize a lot of my skills and experience with, but something also that I think would push me. And it certainly has been pushing me. I'm definitely find myself outside of my own kind of comfort zone a lot doing this job. But it's also, I think, certainly made me a better communicator. I know that. And it's forced me to compartmentalize my time a little bit, where making art now is something more like a luxury rather than something that I'm doing every day for, bread and butter, so to speak. But again, this kind of just feels like, just wearing a different sort of hat for the time being. But it's really, it's awesome to have a job that really kind of calls on so many random aspects things I've done, and so many different parts that are useful.
Fuses it all together.
Yeah.
So what is it that makes Lowkey Arts important to our community? Like, what's your mission statement?
Our mission statement has changed recently, as a matter of fact, and I actually should have it memorized, but don't.
Well, if that's in light of COVID, we'll get to that. So don't. So
okay, yeah, I mean, our mission in a nutshell is to provide tools for people to tap their creativity in one way or another, and to provide examples of what's possible when you do that, in the form of cinematic and musical and performance experiences from as many different places as we can bring here to Hot Springs. I mean, I think a lot of what Lowkey Arts does here, culturally speaking, are things that happen in bigger cities and other places a little more effortlessly from a more perhaps diverse mix of people, or just a larger amount of people in a more, cosmopolitan sort of place. We tend to be sort of off the radar here a little bit. We're kind of like, if you come, you have to want to come to Hot Springs to come to Hot Springs, right? We're not on the interstate. But I think what's going on here is very unique. And I think that the climate here, in terms of the audience of people in this community in town, is very unique. I don't think it compares necessarily to that many other places in America. I think the particular ingredients of the town are very interesting, and the history of the town, no doubt, is a big part of that as well. But the mix of people who are here now, and the kind of things that are available here, culturally speaking, are very unusual, I think, for this part of Arkansas, and changing all the time and evolving all the time. And I think, we at Lowkey Arts pride ourselves as being part of that change and being instrumental in it in downtown Hot Springs in a lot of ways. And I think, our programs have been symbolic of that, and our presence can be felt around town, even though we, now no longer occupy a physical space, at least not for the time being.
So let's talk Valley of the Vapors, one of Hot Springs trademark events. So I've tried to go more or less every year since I was a teenager, and it's safe to say that not every musician that plays there is for everyone, but there's a diversity of sounds that plays across the nights every year in such a way where I think anyone who goes can find one artist or 10 that that they enjoy in some way. So what's the process that goes into curating such a diverse lineup of genres and subgenres?
Well, I can tell you right out the gate that the curation of VOV is largely in the hands of one person, and that person isn't me. That person is Bobby Missel, who's been part of Lowkey Arts since the very beginning of Lowkey Arts in 2005, and has been instrumental in booking all the VOVs, and has pretty much done it single-handedly for, I would say, probably the last 10 years. He vets quite a lot of artists, certainly is deluged for the first couple of months of the year every year with candidates, all of whom, probably 99% of whom are on their way to or from South by Southwest. And so, in a sense, it's a little bit like shooting fish in a barrel. Like, people are coming through anyway, and we just, we have this luxury of basically this sweet spot for about a week every year, where there's just this nonstop thoroughfare right through the middle of Arkansas, people on their way to Austin, and it's been incredibly beneficial, and it's how VOV has been a success, and how it has grown to be the festival that people know, and it's it's synonymous, thankfully, now here in Arkansas with I think what we'd call, underground music or emerging artists, that kind of thing. And certainly, a few of them over the years have gone on to notoriety of one kind or another. But it's, what we do is peel off the most, what we feel is the coolest layer of literally a much thicker amount of artists going to this thing, right? It's like, I mean, if we certainly, we couldn't accommodate everyone, and if we did, the festival would be, it'd be 24 hours a day for a week probably. So, but that's how it's happened, and it's been, it's geographically speaking, we're very it's kind of a coup, actually.
We talked earlier about how they're, like the Mars Volta, you knew them before they were big. The examples of bands or other artists that may have played here before they were big, off the top of your head.
I know that there's a lot of groups that have played here who have become infamous, maybe not big in a U2 or Bruce Springsteen kind of big, or Imagine Dragons or some band of the last decade. There's a lot of cult sort of legendary bands who have played in and around Hot Springs, and I know one in particular from Denver called Christie Front Drive, who were friends of mine, contemporaries of my old bands in Colorado, and just our buddies from down the road in Denver, and they have become something of a this mythical group in that world, and have records that are continually repressed and sell out year after year, which is just remarkable. I know that they played once downtown in a place that's been an art gallery recently, and I think actually just recently went out of business, but right downtown on the corner of Central and Bridge Streets in downtown Hot Springs. I know they played there. There's been I've heard so many rumors of stuff over the years that I'm not sure if they're true or not. I've heard about Fugazi playing in Hot Springs, which I'm pretty sure is untrue. I think they've played in Little Rock.
I've always heard that too and just assumed it was true.
Yeah, I think that's what that is. But no doubt there's people who could school me, and there's probably somebody watching this right now who's probably just yelling at their screen going, "You're an idiot." But
well, if you know better than Sonny, say so in the comments.
Yeah, please do. Actually, that would be awesome.
So yeah, with the average listener, or at least someone who say exclusively listens to mainstream radio or whatnot, David Hill is watching. Hello, David. He says Front Drive played the Citizen Youth Action Coalition Community Center in 1995. There you
go, Dave Hill. Right on, man. Thank you for that. That's right. That was whatever he just said, the acronym for that, CCAC or something like that. I remember that's the kind of a storied institution here in Hot Springs from long before my time, but that's right. Cool.
So what I was about to ask was, so weird music is kind of considered a feature and not a bug of VOV, quote unquote weird music.
Yeah.
But do you ever get any pushback or demand to get someone more mainstream in, if only by, even if only by indie standards? Or?
Only really, frankly, from ourselves. Like we've had, we have in the years that I've been here, which are really the only years I could speak to, the last 2-3 or so. But we've sort of had a short list every year of headlining artists that we consider our sort of like dream festival, who we've approached, and not necessarily had refusals, just for one reason or another, things haven't worked out. But there are, we would love to be able to have a real headlining group kick off VOV every year, if only for to have the whole thing start with as being a big a bang as possible.
Sure.
Part of the beauty of VOV, in a sense, is the obscurity of the bands and the sort of the gamble of the whole thing. I mean, we these days we publish playlists on Spotify and that kind of thing well ahead of the festival, so people can they've got Google and any number of tools of their disposal to educate themselves on who's coming and what they sound like. So, the mystery is really on them. It doesn't have to be a mystery. But having said that, like, part of the joy in it is just throwing things at the wall and seeing if they stick. And, being able to have a roster full of unfamiliar names, and knowing that a week from now, when the whole thing is over, a bunch of people in town are going to love bands X, Y, and Z, and right now they never even heard of them. Like, that's a fun, cool thing to be able to do. That's a great sort of silver lining of doing an event like this.
Yeah, I know of a couple people every year. They'll go through the entire lineup and try and kind of pick and choose which nights, because they can't take off work every night, but they want to go at least one night, so they'll pick the best one based off of that.
Having a big headlining group would put the burden of the cost of that group on the ticket buyers, right? So the joy of VOD, in a sense, for some, for many, is the fact that you can come and see 5, 6, sometimes 7 or even 8 bands in a day for $15. Right? And if we had, some of the artists headlining that we would like, it's going to cost us 50 times what it costs us to get the average band to come and play VOD, to have them play, right? So that 50 times over is going to be handed on to ticket buyers, and that's a whole other can of worms. But that potentially changes the whole nature of the festival, or at least the way people feel about it.
Getting the grassroots vibe. Makes sense.
The bigger the artist that came in, the more headlining kind of a band that came in, the more we start to move beyond the comfort zone of our little indie community and the people that love stuff and who are always there and our friends, and especially groups who have achieved mainstream success. You start to bring in total, X factor audience, people that are just wild cards. You don't know how they're going to behave. There's no, when you go to an event at an underground or a DIY space, and you're part of that culture, and you've been doing that, engaging in that for a long time, there's a certain etiquette that comes with it, and a kind of routine, kind of base level respect for everybody. That comes with the territory, right? And I think more successful artists start to bring in audiences that aren't familiar with that, and you start to get, problems that I've seen occur at shows where there's one group who are just seriously overshadowing everybody else, So
Phil also gives a shout out to Larkin Poe, says they played here and they're on fire now.
They sure are on fire. It's awesome. Yeah, they've played here twice, and they were very sweet and gracious both times. They're awesome.
So the crowds at VOV and a lot of low-key events, they'll have everyone from kids and dogs running around having a good time to people with gray or white hair jamming out, and then 100 something, 20, 30, 40 somethings drinking and socializing. So how do you cultivate an atmosphere that's welcoming to everyone like that and still keep it safe all at the same time?
Well, that's a very good question, actually. And we are fortunate to have a clientele who are, a family who have grown up largely here in Hot Springs with Lowkey Arts, the organization, at Lowkey Arts, the former venue. And a lot of people, there's that social, that social bond that people have tends to act as a, governing mechanism too, in the way people, behave with one another. And largely, again, what we've done is not really out of the ordinary in terms of DIY spaces around the country and around the world at large. I mean, we've created what we feel is a safe space for anybody to come and experience, pure creativity, without the bottom line being the motivating factor for anything, without profit dictating the decisions that we're making. And we're very fortunate that for the most part, people have risen to the occasion with that, and we've had very few incidents at Lowkey Arts that were in any way touching on any of the potential problems that you mentioned. most shows that have had alcohol involved have been, there are age restrictions on that, and on the larger events and more festival kind of events like VOV and Hot Water Hills and that kind of thing. Again, there is a culture within, certainly within Hot Springs, but within the bigger sort of zeitgeist, if you will, of underground music and these kind of spaces that we've created where you can't just be an unruly asshole, carte blanche. You know what I mean? Like there are consequences, and we do conduct ourselves seriously, and we take the safety of everybody present very seriously. So.
Yeah, I mean, I can't say I've gone every night, every year, but I personally never noticed any kind of incident.
And we've experimented with signage about to do with various issues to do with assault and awareness about assault or just odd behavior and that kind of thing. And largely these things kind of work themselves out. I'm happy to report here at least, I feel like. Pardon me, just a sec.
Sure.
I feel, I feel like the clientele here in Hot Springs for Lowkey Arts events and the people who support what we're doing really do support us and value our presence here and don't put their own,
selfishness.
Yeah, people aren't selfish and don't necessarily put their own needs ahead of the bigger need.
Sure.
Exists.
So I talked about the genre diversity earlier, which there's a lot of both VOV and Hot Water Hills, and there's a good mix of both men and women on stage and in the audience. But one thing I've noticed, at least every time I've gone, is the crowd seems awfully white. How do you respond to that?
I could not agree with you more. And something that I noticed my first visit to Hot Springs as a potential ED of Lowkey Arts when I came to interview a few years in 2017. I was here for Hot Water Hills, and you're making a very valid point. And in a town with a significant Black population, those citizens should be represented in what we're doing and how we do it. The simple fact of the matter is it's not as easy to engage people as you might think, and there is a lot of resistance to. I've experienced resistance to a number of different things in Hot Springs, even just to do with sort of an invisible line existing between one part of downtown and the other, and where people just voluntarily don't feel like they're being engaged with or being what's the word I'm looking for? They're not being there's no I don't want to use the word lure. That's the wrong context. But there aren't the feedback that I've gotten from members of the Black community here in Hot Springs is that there is a degree of discomfort for people engaging in the kind of events that have traditionally taken place. And we've I'm not really clear why necessarily. I haven't lived here forever. I certainly am not a social scientist and don't pretend to have any kind of like quick fix for any of this. But I will tell you that as an organization, we go out of our way to create diverse programming, especially with the festivals, especially with Hot Water Hills, because I feel like Hot Water Hills, we all feel, all of Lowkey Arts is aware that Hot Water Hills is a different animal entirely than VOV, and it caters to an entirely different audience. It's in an open area in downtown Hot Springs. For anyone who doesn't know, it's more of a fair kind of a vibe, and it's much more visible and accessible to tourists and visiting families and people just, out for a stroll in downtown Hot Springs. Whereas VOV is something that you really have to know about, and seek it out, and it doesn't really get foot traffic. Hot Water Hills does, and I feel like Hot Water Hills, in a sense, is obliged to be more representative of who it's being attended by, right? And if you go to Hot Water Hills during the day, when it's free, between noon and 4 or 5 o'clock, whenever we start charging at the gate, I believe last year in 2019, I think we had 1,200 people pass through the gate on that Saturday, and a significant portion of them were not white. But in the evening, when the show becomes the show, and the fair kind of shuts down, and it becomes more of a concert, and you got to pay to get in, the diversity definitely falls off, even if there is diversity on stage. And I think there are certainly a number of reasons for that, and I think certainly one of them, like the argument can be made that the diversity on the stage, even when we have artists, in some cases from right down the road in Little Rock, their audience doesn't follow them to Hot Springs.
Sure.
And I don't know why that's the case, but that is the case. And it's been a challenge for us. It's certainly a challenge that we embrace and are continually trying to turn around. But that's a fact of life here. And it's something that I find personally disappointing, because I'd love to have programming that appeals to a wider section of our community, and I would love to think of Lowkey Arts as a fertile ground for kind of progressive attitudes here, and we intend to keep working towards that goal. I don't think it's unobtainable at all. I think it's just what we're doing requires some fine tuning. And some partnering, I think, too. I don't think that we necessarily have done everything we can to engage other people here in town. But we're a work in progress, and we certainly are accessible to anybody who wants to collaborate with us or has an idea for us,
So we're about to get pretty negative with talking about how COVID has impacted Lowkey, but I'll give you a positive question real quick. Before COVID hit, what was your favorite event or experience at Lowkey so far?
Well, I always enjoy the VOVs, and certainly wasn't here for a lot of the kind of storied and golden era events that I've heard so many colorful things about. But in my time here in the last couple of years, my first VOV was my favorite. It was 2018. There was a whole bunch of bands from Canada who were great. One band in particular who I love called Friggs played, and that was just incredible for me. I mean, it just really made me happy to be part of Lowkey Arts, proud to bring that kind of those artists of that caliber and that kind of excitement here. And that's certainly the first thing that comes to mind. Although I've seen a lot of incredible stuff in the short time I've been here.
This may be my bias speaking, but I was particularly fond of the adult animal night that you guys collaborated with the library on.
Yeah, and that was just almost about a year ago, right? It was like October, November last year. That was a great time, yeah. And it's a shame we don't have the space anymore, because doing events like that actually would have been a lot of fun. And hopefully we'll get the chance to do that again sometime. But that was great. I had no idea what to expect. We actually had a bigger crowd for those animals than we did for a lot of shows, bands.
Maybe we'll find some way in the future.
Yeah, I hope so.
Let's speaking of the future, let's fast forward to the present, actually, 2020. The initial outbreak of COVID-19 happened at pretty much the worst time for a tourist city, right before spring break. I mean, it ruined not only VOV, but the St. Patrick's Day Parade and so many other events that had all this planning and money wrapped up in them. Can you go over in a little detail what those first couple of weeks of the pandemic felt like behind the scenes?
Really bewildering, frankly. You know, we had to make that call about VOV pretty early in the whole sort of cycle of the pandemic. And it was a difficult decision to make, and we felt like we were doing the responsible thing and the appropriate thing, and putting people's safety first, which we still feel was the right thing to do, without a doubt. But it was unpleasant. It was very difficult to see a whole lot of work kind of unravel very quickly. Especially, you know, we were really proud of VOV this year. We're proud of it every year, but we had kind of, you know, developed some new aspects to it this year, and had a couple of peripheral kind of events going on, and people coming to town who, you know, to get back to what you're talking about as far as having a headliner goes, in lieu of having a sort of like, you know, headlining big name band this year, we actually did try to, you know, put some star power, so to speak, into some of our peripheral events. And we had Steve Shelley from Sonic Youth was coming to be on hand for a film premiere that we were going to do for a film called Desolation Center, which we were really excited about. And Keith Morris from Black Flag and Circle Jerks was going to be here to do a reading from his book, which, you know, was we're just kind of spitballing ideas and thinking, like, what could we do to sort of, you know, buffer the VOV experience. People are here all day long. The show doesn't start till 5, 6 o'clock sometimes. Like, what can we do? What other awesome things can we do? Well, we're here downtown. We've got these great spaces available to us. And so, you know, we had done that. And so having all of that deflate very quickly was very deflating and sad. But at the same time, you know, we were fortunate. You know, a lot of people really lost a lot. A lot of people really suffered a lot because of COVID, and you know, fortunately, that we weren't in that boat. And so, I don't want to make a bigger deal out of it than it was. We lost some money, and we've certainly suffered some setbacks, but it's forced us to kind of think on our feet a little bit, and expedited our move on into online teaching and that kind of stuff. And in that sense, it's actually worked out okay.
Yeah, that's what I was about to ask next. I mean, you know, it's kind of forced some changes and adaptations in the way people work, but you know, some of those changes can be positive. I mean, for example, you know, as an event coordinator like yourself, I've been doing exclusively virtual events here at the library, and now, you know, the first one was actually with David Hill, but since then I've learned a lot, and I'm kind of in the groove of it now, I feel like. But you know, for example, this interview could potentially reach more people virtually than we could ever fit here in the library auditorium.
Yeah, that's crazy to think about.
But on the other hand, I'm sure there's some kind of events like a concert where there's not really any replacement for that in-person.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And we had a good amount of encouragement locally from our friends and you know, people on the Lowkey Arts board and that kind of thing, to do virtual events immediately. And I was reluctant, frankly, because the joy in what we do and the love in what we do is in live events. And I think you and I having a discussion one-on-one like this is a totally worthwhile format and a satisfying experience. I hope for you, it is for me, certainly. But this is, you know, to watch me standing back here thrashing around and you know, attempting to not only sonically deliver the goods of a live performance, but you know, just the energetically, just the presence of, and being in the same space with people, it's lost. It's like it pales in comparison. And I've you know, been certainly aware of other things going on online and other live events that people have been doing, and certainly there's plenty that have had momentum, and certainly I think as a trend, the whole thing is gaining momentum. But for the first few months, the things that I was watching were underwhelming and just frankly seemed to kind of be missing the point that they were attempting to make. You know what I mean? Like there's something to be said for the excitement of live music, of course. There's certainly something to be said for creating dialogue and creating content and attempting to engage people in a crazy time during the kind of social experiences we've all been having this year. I don't think I'm alone in wanting what Lowkey Arts puts its name on to be as quality an experience as possible. And so just rushing into doing stuff and putting and broadcasting it live, wasn't that appealing. Being able to control it and really deliver something that people are moved by, that is appealing. And that's certainly something that we hope to be able to do. But again, all in due time. I think for the cards we've been dealt, so to speak, at this time, I think that we are making the most of ourselves with our classes and how we're diversifying that and the things we're attempting to kind of fold into that program and slowly but surely having successes with that, which is very encouraging. And we actually, ironically enough, are going to be moving very soon now in the next few weeks, going to be moving into an interview series of our own, much like this one, that we're calling Meet the Makers. And going to be having some really exciting artists and musicians be part of that, who I think have a lot to say and have a lot of experience to share, not only with people in Hot Springs, but people everywhere. And I think as far as our mission as Lowkey Arts, we are actively and productively fulfilling that. I just think it's for the time being, it's taken on a different form, but I don't think there's anybody in our organization who isn't eager to get back to doing what we're known for, which is VOV and live events and things of that nature.
That brings us to 2021. What are Lowkey's plans? What should people be excited for?
Well, 2021 will most likely start, as most New Year's do for us, with Arkansas Shorts, Night of Short Film, Film Festival. Exactly how that's going to play out in January 2021 remains to be seen. We've traditionally done that at the Malco Theater, and that's definitely not that's not out of the question at all. But we also realize that we're talking about something 3 short months from now, and there's not a whole bunch of certainty at this point that things are going to be that much different than they are now. So we are beginning to, examine our options as far as that goes. There's been a lot of successful drive-in events here in town that the Hot Springs Documentary Film Festival has been promoting, and actually Lowkey Arts is partnering with them in the next couple of weeks to do 3 events during their festival. So it may work out that Arkansas Shorts as a drive-in experience for 2021 makes the most sense. So we'll see about that. But beyond that, we have a bunch of hopefuls as far as new instructors go, and ideas for workshops and other kind of more formalized learning, and are really putting a lot of focus on that. And we're ready to jump into action doing VOV anytime that seems reasonable and doable. It's no secret that South by Southwest is not committed to happening in 2021, and until that decision is made, it makes the future of the immediate future of VOV for this year very difficult to predict. If South by Southwest doesn't happen, we will start to examine our options as far as doing an event like that at a different time of the year, or whatever else whatever other factors might be considered.
No chance of adding an extra virtual VOV?
Well, I mean, that's funny. That's interesting, actually. That's a very clever. To make for an interesting T-shirt, I guess. Yeah, I wouldn't say that that's out of the question. It's just got to be something that we would all, it's something that we'd feel, have to be something that we feel really strongly about putting that name on, and just by comparison to the sort of like historic events that bear that name, like, can we really like actually call it that? Will it have that kind of meaning or impact for people? If we can do that with integrity and say yes, then yeah, absolutely. But VOV 2021, if things are still essentially as they are now, may just be a more scaled back thing. It may be a more hand selected thing where we're rather than catching people on their way to and from Austin, we're just reaching out to a handful of people and they're making a special trip here or something. I mean, that's not impossible. But the VOV that people know and that they love, and the sheer value of all of everything you get for a $15 ticket every day, that's a very unique circumstance that makes that possible.
Well, Lowkey's done a lot to support the community and the artists in the community and bring art to the community. So what can the people do to support Lowkey?
Well, the number one thing people could do would be to join our Friends of Lowkey program, folk, which is available on our website, lowkeyarts.org/donate, or it's easily navigatable from a big red button right up at the top. Folk started out as kind of a discount program for people who were sort of frequent flyers of Lowkey Arts events, but the last couple of years we've taken the emphasis off the discount part and placed it where it should have been in the first place, which is on the fact that Lowkey Arts as an institution in this town needs the support of people here to exist. Otherwise, it really couldn't do what it does. And so asking people to join folk at a cost of $10 a month, we feel is something that is unnoticeable for a lot of people, and really goes a huge way to help us cover our expenses and produce the kind of programming that we do and develop the programs that we are. And we are really unprecedented time, and I know it's difficult for people to prioritize where they spend their money, and we are not oblivious to those realities, but we have every intention of being here for the long haul and being part of the dynamic future of Hot Springs and the progressive culture of what's going on here downtown. And so we intend to be here to produce events that reflect that. And our filmmaking program and Arkansas Shorts have established us with a certain community of people, filmmakers in Arkansas and beyond, and have gone a great way to legitimize the efficacy of what we're doing in terms of education, and we are now starting to apply the same kind of thinking to other programs and other disciplines to do with photography and graphic design, and even teaching musical instruments. So we feel very serious about what we're doing, and are confident that we don't put our name on anything that isn't quality and isn't coming from a place of actual fundamentally really caring about what we're doing and caring about the people here that we're doing it for, and wanting to see Hot Springs continue the trajectory it's been on for the last 10, 15 years, longer.
That was a thoughtful answer. All right, well, we are going to call it a night here soon. Before we go, I do want to tell the audience, next week on Wednesday the 7th at 6 p.m., I'll be interviewing via Facebook Live Dr. Gene Shelby. He's the Garland County Health Officer. We're going to talk about the COVID-19 pandemic, kind of at a local level about Hot Springs and Garland County. So if you have any questions, be sure to get him prepared, and he'll be happy to answer that. Well, Sonny, it's been a real pleasure having you, and I'm going to give you the final word here. Is there any message you want to leave anyone watching with?
Well, I think anybody who's made it this far in this conversation, I appreciate your interest whatsoever. And as a representative of Lowkey Arts, I want to just take this opportunity to thank you, Paul, for allowing us to spread our message a little bit further here in Hot Springs. And everything I've just said is really what we intend on doing. We intend to be here. We intend to not let COVID be the thing that set us back permanently. It's been an obstacle that we're rising to, and we're just very grateful for everyone's support and their patience while this all plays out. So thank you.
Any upcoming event or online workshop of any kind you'd like to point them to, or just where can they see your schedule?
Yeah, sure. We've just announced a new pair of home recording workshops are going to be kicking off on October 19th with Harry Glazer from Bonsai Florist. Those are online. They're available. Registration's open now. It can be found at lowkeyarts.org/Lowkey Labs. Or just Google Lowkey Labs, you'll find it. We have a handful of other instructors who we're attempting to entice into workshops and other things of that nature for the last part of the year and the beginning part of 2021. So we're excited about that, but nothing I can really let out of the bag just yet. But
stay tuned.
I am very pleased to say that we will be kicking off what I mentioned before. The interview series we're going to be doing is going to be called Meet the Makers, and that will be launching sometime before the end of October. And I'm very, very pleased to say that the first guest of that series is going to be Damon Locks, who is a musician and visual artist from Chicago, who I find his work very inspiring, and consider him a friend and a peer, and I'm very excited to share his work and a conversation between us with people here in Hot Springs and with any luck beyond. So look forward to launching that very soon. But in the meantime, I appreciate you allowing me to talk about it here, Paul. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Sonny. Thank you, audience, and
thanks, everyone.
Have a great night.
Talk to you soon.